Money Roots is made possible by the support of our sponsor, Rooted Planning Group. Are you ready to take control of your financial future? Look no further than Rooted Planning Group, your trusted partner in financial well-being. At www.rootedpg.com, you'll discover a wealth of resources and expertise to help you thrive financially. Rooted Planning Group specializes in personalized financial planning, investment management, and retirement strategies. They understand that every financial journey is unique, and they're here to guide you every step of the way. With a team of experienced advisors, Rooted Planning Group is committed to helping you cultivate a secure and prosperous future. Visit www.rootedpg.com today to learn more about how Rooted Planning Group can help you grow your money roots. Welcome to Money Roots, the podcast where personal finance gets personal. Each week, Amy and her guests dig deep into the world of finance, making it more approachable and understandable for everyone, no matter where you are on your financial journey. From savings and investments to budgeting and planning, we'll bring you practical advice, inspiring stories, and expert insights. We believe that everyone has the potential to grow a healthy financial future, and we're here to help you nurture it. So whether you're a financial guru or just starting to plant the seeds of your financial knowledge, this is the place for you. Get ready to uncover the tools and strategies that can help you thrive financially. So without further ado, let's dive into today's episode of Money Roots.
Hello, Money Root listeners. We are excited to be back. Kerrie and I are doing a jam session on something that we're getting a lot of questions on, and that is tariffs. Kerrie, I don't know about you, but man, I'm getting a ton of questions about this in our meetings with clients and just in general, just talking with family members. Since we've heard a couple of big things in the news since President-elect Trump, prior President Trump got elected, one of the big things that he ran his campaign on was tariffs. Right after he got elected, there was a big announcement that he proposed putting 25% tariff on goods from Canada and Mexico, and then an additional 10% on China from what they're already, what already exists. How about some of the questions you're getting? Are you getting a lot of questions on this topic as well?
Yeah, a lot of questions on, I think people think of themselves individually, what does this mean for me and my wallet, or what does this mean for our portfolio? So some of those more personal questions in the news, it's constantly a big picture topic, but for us, it's reaching down and talking about it on a more personal level, and how does it affect our day in and day out lives?
Yeah. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
How will, in your opinion, and we can kind of share ideas, but how will, if some of these tariffs do get put in place, and some of the announcements have been made, how do you think the tariff plan will change things and affect the individual household economies as well as our global economy?
One of the things that I've read recently and maybe heard a little bit on the news is talk around, specifically Mexico. And there's been about $1 trillion in goods that's come across the border in the last year. And if these tariffs potentially go through, there is talk of this could increase some of the consumer cost on core goods, which when economists talk about core goods, a lot of times they like to take out food and gas. So some of your other everyday expenses could increase around 1%. So, that's a small impact, but it does add up, especially for those that are living day in and day out on a little bit tighter of a budget. So it is a little bit concerning.
I always thank you for taking a moment and explaining core goods, because what hits a lot of our pocketbooks the most is food and gas, right? Those are are two main. If I look at my budget, I don't know about you, but that's two main spenders in my budget on a monthly basis. It's like, what's the biggest amount of money that you spend? It's your home, if you include taxes and property taxes and insurance and the mortgage and stuff like that. And then the next thing below that for a lot of our clients and for, I think, our team's household tends to be food. So it's kind of funny that that's not brought into consideration.
Yeah. And to me, it's, when they are talking about it and they're saying, well, core goods without food and gas, that's actually, after I pay all my bills, that's probably the biggest thing that I look at, especially, having an 18-year-old son at home. We have a pretty large food bill. So my biggest concern is actually food. And so that is funny and a little bit frustrating when you're trying to think about and forecast some of these things, which forecasting what's actually going to happen is turning out to be a little bit of a juggling game. So,
well, even some of the foods that we get here in the U.S. are imported, though, and Canada provides a fair amount of milk to the U.S. and Mexico specifically provides a fair amount of fruit to the U.S. So, and actually gas is one of the biggest products that Canada, oil is one of the biggest products that Canada exports to us and we import from them. So if the proposed 25% tariff actually came to fruition, it could be pretty impactful from both of those countries on some of our non-core goods that you were mentioning.
Right. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about, because, right after Thanksgiving, Trudeau kind of, hopped on a plane, flew down and met with President-elect Trump to talk through some of the language that was being used. And it seemed as though they were able to talk some things out. But what do you think about some of these tactics that are being thrown out there? And do you think they'll go through?
I think, as no really surprise, I think that possibly, and maybe even hopefully, that Trump's using these maybe just as a negotiating starting point, and that it maybe can get better from what he's saying. And some of the things he said on the campaign trail, he's already backed off from a little bit. So that's sort of one thought there. And then, I think there's always the question too, like, can he legally do this? And so that's been some of the things that we've talked about or whatever. And it does seem that he has a little bit more power than you would think when it comes to that. And that was a little surprising to me when I was reading about this and studying up on it, as, a lot of things in Congress have to jump through a lot of loopholes. But this does seem like that some of his negotiating, he does have a little bit more control than you would think. So that was one thing that came to my mind as well.
Yeah, I think this is going to be something that, it's, we don't know what the true economic policy is actually going to be. He has campaigned on growing America, like, how are we going to pay for some of the things that have been proposed? For example, the current tax legislation that's set to expire next year. There's been discussion about continuing, that tax law. And when the question has come up, well, how are we going to pay with it? How are we going to pay for it? Excuse me. Then, there's been discussion about growing the economy. Any thoughts on how tariffs will help grow our economy or how it will help revitalize our economy?
Yeah, I think that if you kind of take a step back and think about tariffs and why politicians even want to use them as a negotiation tactic, and it's in the news all the time, is Trump's campaign and often other politicians' campaign, is they want to focus on increasing American growth and American manufacturing and really making sure our economy is booming. And the way to do that is, keep potentially exports that are from competitor or imports from competitors that are causing our American manufacturers, companies and products to maybe take the back seat. So the idea is if we increase tariffs on some of the competitors in foreign countries, then that will encourage American products to be the preferred one. And that's how politicians kind of negotiate, and they tout that, our economy will do better domestically if we, potentially increase tariffs. One thing that I do think it's interesting is how some of the very specific tariffs that have came up, in the recent years, not necessarily in this campaign trail, but looking back, is there'll be proposed tariffs that are as a blanket across the board. We're going to raise this. And then it ends up being a very specific tariff, like on a washing machine, so it's funny how these negotiations start, and then you get to the other side of them, and then, okay, well, this is on washing machines and solar panels. So it's like, okay, well, that's a very specific thing. And, maybe in 2025, you're not going to have to buy a washing machine. But thinking through some of that's been interesting also, and how things start and how they end up. So that'll be the big question in 2025.
And beyond, right? I mean, it's not the first time that there's been Trump's first administration put some tariffs in place. And from what I understand, and I haven't done a ton of research on that, so I just want to be clear on that. From what I understand, those tariffs didn't actually get removed during the Biden administration. They were still in place during the Biden administration. It's just that this particular administration now is thinking about raising it more globally. At least that's been some of the discussion, is that it's going to be raised on a more global level. And certainly was a shocking comment to say Canada, and I wasn't so shocked about the Mexico comment, but I was a little bit taken aback by saying that we were going to raise prices in Canada by 25, or tariffs, in Canada by 25%. That was a bit of a shocker to me. I was a little taken aback by that
lumping them
comment
together is a little surprising. That isn't.
Yeah. So thinking about, our global world anymore, I mean, this is something that I think a lot about, because we're not, when we're doing portfolio management, we talk about diversification of not just like stocks, but also regions, right? We talk a lot about having some in US and some in international, and it's become more and more a global economy, especially now, I think, with how much trades are going in every different direction. I think there's some concern on both sides if we were to make it too painful, that it could ultimately impact our consumers, right? And that could then cause some pain in the pocketbook. One thing that I think right now, this is just me personally, one thing I think that the oncoming administration has in their back pocket a little bit is the fact that interest rates right now are on the higher side, right? And so if we start to feel some pain or pinch, I would say, from any tariffs that are implemented, the Fed has some control the Fed has control over lowering interest rates to try to speed up the economy if they see it slow it down too quick. Now, we haven't seen that yet. We've seen inflation come down, but it's kind of holding its own for the most part. The last couple numbers that have come out have been pretty in line with what was expected, but not showing any signs of a real recession. So I do have some, as far as like when people ask me, what do you think this will do to the economy? It's not one thing ever that does anything to the economy, right? It's all these moving parts that does something. And I would say that from a 2025 perspective, one thing that I would say this country has in their back pocket is that we have some room to reduce interest rates should we see a slowdown due to any kind of price increase that would happen due to tariffs. So that is something that is on the positive side of our overall economy in general. And I know one thing, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think, thinking through what you're saying, it feels like kind of post-COVID. And since a lot of this, it's just been an interesting few years. And I think going into the next few years, the word balance and and figuring out, what should we do as individuals, and then what should we do as portfolio managers, and making decisions on investments. I think it's going to be a balancing act for us as advisors and us as investors. And it's also going to be a balancing act for those making the decisions, with the Fed funds rate. And I think it is going to be a continual topic in the news. I expect us to hear about it all year long, especially as Trump does enter his presidency, and we do see some of these policy changes and potentially these tariffs. And I think a lot of these ideas that he's putting out there sometimes feel, and this is not political at all, but it's almost feels contradictory. Like, we're going to do this while at the same time this happens. But really, if you do one thing, then that could negatively affect another thing. So my mind just stays on that word continually, making sure things are just balanced from all perspectives.
Yeah, and it's not going to affect everybody the same, right? There's going to be some retailers that are going to be more impacted than other retailers. So when we look at, some that have, and again, it depends on what the actual policy ends up being. I think that's a big thing that people keep saying, what do you think is going to happen? And we're like, what are you doing? Or, we're like, we're not doing anything right now, because right now we haven't seen anything that's actual proposed policy. So until we see a very solidified policy that is that's going to be run up the pole, for lack of a better term, then I think people hire us so that we don't make those kinds of knee-jerk decisions, so that we look at all the data and we don't look at it in a vacuum. We look at it from a global perspective. Yeah, a more, okay, yes, if this happens, what could offset it? Or if this happens, how does that impact? And one of some retailers can shift much easier than other retailers. And I think there's certainly areas that we need to be keeping an eye on. One that comes to mind for me, and it's one that a lot of people, because the dollar stores that have popped up all over these really rural towns, they've done a really good job finding little pockets of towns that have distance in them, for places to get a few groceries or, minor things, right? So I know in our little town of Jasper, you would never in a million years think a dollar store would be successful, but that place is always busy, and it's a very small population, but between Woodhull, Jasper, and Shrewsbury, there's nothing for 25 miles. So it's, it really gives that unique group of people a place to go. That type of retailer could be very vulnerable. So there's certainly pockets that could lead to some lower sales projections, or that would be impactful to those people that are in that area. So we just have to kind of keep an eye on it and see what happens. Yeah. If we're, what the policy ends up being.
Yeah. And that's the perfect example of how does it trickle down? Well, a lot of the Dollar General store, different stores like that, I don't know what the percentage is, but a fairly decent size, probably percentage, that's an example of things that could possibly be coming from China. So that's sort of how that trickles down, and where that final increase ends up landing. And part of it's going to be on the consumer.
Yeah. And then you think of bigger retailers like Walmart and Amazon, and, they also have a lot of product that are brought in. They're imported in, right? But they're so big and they have so much negotiation power that the prices might go up, but they're probably not going to go up as much.
Right.
Yeah. Kerrie, anything that any other, as you've been talking to clients, I'm just trying to think of some of the concerns, any other concerns that have come up in your conversations, or, terminology that you think is helpful for people to understand as they navigate what they're hearing in the news right now?
I think one of the things we always talk about with clients and needs to continue to be on the forefront is understanding your risk tolerance, because, the last few years you've seen such a heavy, things have performed really well from growth stocks and things like that. But I think moving forward, again, back on my balance word, I think really understanding how you're invested and is it in alignment with your long-term goals. I mean, the focus is always on the long term. These are short-term things we're talking about. While it's important to stay educated and up to date on this kind of stuff, it's also important to make sure that you have more of a long-term perspective. And in any money you don't have that's sort of considered short-term, we don't really recommend you have that invested in a way that could potentially cause a risk for you. But I think understanding your risk tolerance and what does that really mean, and then looking at how you're invested going forward and knowing like what percentage of your portfolio is in international stocks, is in U.S. equities, and remembering that some of the U.S. companies that are in that U.S. equities classification, they do have international exposure also. So, what does that mean over the long haul? But I would say keeping a long-term perspective with maybe some short-term thoughts and education around how you're going into 2025.
Well, I appreciate that 2 cents. I think that's a great segue to finish the conversation about this topic, because it is short-term That's why I said, it's important that we don't make knee-jerk reactions. We need to see what policy actually brings before we make any decisions about, recommendations that we would make. We thank everybody for listening to this podcast. We hope it was helpful. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, we would love to hear from you. If you find somebody that you think would be interested in listening to this podcast, please feel free to share it with them. And we hope you all have a wonderful holiday season, whatever holiday it is that you may celebrate. And we will see you in the new year.
You've been listening to Money Roots, your go-to podcast for making personal finance accessible and approachable. Thanks for joining us today. Amy and her guests have enjoyed guiding you through the roots of your financial journey. Remember, whether you're planting new seeds of financial knowledge or nurturing the growth of your existing financial plans, Money Roots is here to support you every step of the way. Be sure to follow them on Facebook, X, LinkedIn, and Instagram for more resources. And, of course, subscribe to Money Roots wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. A big thank you to the sponsor, Rooted Planning Group, for making this show possible. At Rooted Planning Group, they're committed to helping you cultivate a thriving financial future. Until next time, keep growing your money roots.